For those of you who are volunteers, you're probably aware that I try to work in airplane analogies every time I get a chance. I have been fascinated by the airline industry for a lot of years, so I consider myself really fortunate to be listening in on a podcast called Airplane Geeks about a year ago, actually, maybe a little longer than a year ago. And I heard Jonathan actually as a guest speaker on that show. And I was like, I gotta get this guy, to come talk to our organization, because we do deal with online software an awful lot, but I think that a lot of what Jonathan does carries, it has some universal themes. So please join me in welcoming Jonathan Norris.
So, good evening, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I have to say, when I looked online this morning and saw there were 121 people registered, I was a little intimidated, but I'll try and put that behind me. Hopefully you can understand my accent. What I'm going to do, I just thought I'd give you a quick overview and a bit of background about me. So Gloria covered a bit of what I've done. So this is my world. As you can tell from my accent, I'm German. I live in Germany. It's a bit of a hangover from working at Airbus. I've lived in Hamburg for 5 years. When I changed jobs last year, my wife and 2 daughters, who are at the top of my world, basically said, we're quite happy in Hamburg, so you go and work in London, that's fine. And you're all into Airline Passenger Experience, so I get the experience at the back of the plane once a week. And, well, I'm just going to go through here. So, when I'm not with my family, the other things I like to spin around, I'm a very keen photographer. I'm really keen on the mountains. This is me trying to get up a rock face quite some time ago in my youth. Now we get onto the planes. I've been in aviation since I was 17. I did a traditional apprenticeship building aircraft with British Aerospace in Hatfield, which is just outside London. And sort of right up to the kind of present day. So, this isn't an Airbus aircraft, this is a Boeing aircraft, which I took a photograph of. But I've worked my way up the ladder. I've got 27 years. So those of you who can work out the maths know how old I am. I've got 27 years experience in the aviation industry, and I've always worked for airframers. I worked for British Aerospace for 17 years. I worked for Fairchild Dornier, which was a German-American aircraft company based in Munich, and then latterly worked for Airbus. I'm very keen on the mountains, like going to the mountains. Did I say I like climbing the mountains? Sports cars. I'm a very keen Porsche fanatic. I used to have a Porsche, then I decided to have daughters instead. And the car went. And here we are, back in the mountains. And travel. I like to travel. And as you can see from the globe, that's a plot of my travels in the last kind of 3 months. So I kind of permanently move about. I always figure it's easy, it's hard to hit a moving target. So I work for Inc. I'm just going to open this so I can get my notes. So Inc. is the global leader in connecting companies with travellers. We do the in-flight magazines for over 3 dozen airlines. We produce magazines in 17 languages and sell advertising in over 100 countries. So we're actually the world's leading publisher of airline in-flight magazines. So some of the magazines that you're probably familiar with are Hemispheres that we produce for United and Continental, and a range of other airlines there. Another major part of the business, which may be of interest to people in the room, is that we run an ad server where it's very common now, I think in the US as well, but particularly in Europe, to have print-to-home boarding passes. And what our ad server does, it will look at the passenger profile. So when the passenger goes to print out his boarding pass, it will look at the passenger profile and adjust the advert based on that passenger. So if you're travelling with your partner, you will probably get very different adverts based on your kind of profile, your age, your sex, your location, your origination, your destination. That will generate what we believe is the advert which is going to bring in the biggest return. The thing that I do at, I have to stop moving about so you can actually hear me. The thing that I do for Inc., I run the trade media and events. And the single biggest package that we do for trade media is we produce a magazine, a range of online media for the Airline Passenger Experience Association. This is an association that's been around for about 27 years. There's about 100 airline members, another 300 vendor members, but essentially what they do is it's a non-profit organisation, and they share best practice with airlines, the whole supply chain, and the whole idea is to try and improve the passenger experience, which everyone should be quite grateful for, because quite often the passenger experience is not so hot, and also, help the airlines to to monetize that. We'll come a bit more onto the market in a minute. So yet another plug. There's a whole load of magazines over there that myself and a couple of people lugged up here. So it'd be great if you help yourself afterwards, have a flick through. There's just some examples of the magazine that we produce, but that's not really why I'm here. So I want to talk a bit about the market, and I have to read my notes because I'm not that familiar with the US market and the facts and figures. But I was trying to look at what the upside was of aviation, why it's important in the US, and also the downside, what are the challenges in the US. So on the upside, aviation provides over 1 million jobs in the United States. So aviation in its broadest sense. And those jobs equated to $450 billion of economic activity, and actually provide the US with a trade surplus of $58 billion. These are 2008 numbers. So it's huge numbers. I mean, it really is very significant. The downside, and I find this quite startling, US carriers burn 20 billion gallons of jet fuel a year, which is 250 million tons of CO2. US aircraft spent 213 million minutes taxiing or in ground holds. And airline delays cost the US industry and passengers $33 billion in 2007. So the point of saying that really is, it's a very dynamic industry, it's extremely important, but there's still room for improvement, innovation is needed, technology is needed, how do we get more out of it, and we'll touch a bit more on that in a second. I thought this was an interesting snapshot, because when I had the chat with Gloria, she was saying, well, most of the aerospace industry in the US is on the West Coast, and here we are on the East Coast, and I just pointed this just to show that most of the planes are on the East Coast. So this is interesting. So 4,297 aircraft flying anywhere in the US any time of day. There's somewhere between 3,500 and 6,500 planes in US airspace. So it's not an insignificant number. If we look at the factors affecting aviation and why the aviation industry is so cyclical, there's a whole range of different things that we need to look at. And anyone who follows aviation knows that the airlines, in the good years they struggle, and in the lean years they struggle even more. There's a famous quote which said that how do you become a millionaire? Is you start off as a billionaire and buy an airline. That's how you get rid of money. So yeah, the factors affecting the aviation industry, things like fuel price, really sensitive. As a very major driver for aviation. Economic growth, network development, the capabilities of the aircraft, traffic forecasts, emerging markets, high-speed rail. I mean, in many countries of the world, high-speed rail is a real alternative. Having now experienced Amtrak today for the first time, I think the aviation industry may be safe for some time. There's no one from Amtrak here, is there? So this is an interesting quote, and I like to throw some of these quotes out there, but it's interesting. In 2000, the average load factor, so load factor is how full the plane is. So the plane was 72, the plane's total, 72% full. The airline industry made 2.6 billion. Last year, it was 81%, the planes were 81% full, and they lost 2.5 billion. And that just shows you how much impact there is with what's going on in the rest of the world, the fuel price, etc., and how variable the industry is. And so very cost sensitive. So you can see from here that the profitability of an airline is far more sensitive to revenue than cost, and this is really the driver behind why airlines love these nasty check-in bag fees. Because if you can make a 1% improvement in revenue, you would have to cut out 10% maintenance costs to get the same hit on your bottom line. So ancillary revenue is an absolute essential part now of an airline's makeup. some of you might be familiar with Allegiant, who fly out of Las Vegas. They make, on average, $45 in ancillary revenue per passenger per ticket, which is absolutely phenomenal. They're world leaders in extracting additional money out of ticket prices. And I think there's been some work now in the US to show that the airlines now have to actually declare what the actual cost is, rather than kind of hooking you in on this fake cost, and then you go through all the ancillary revenue pages, and the price goes up and up and up. Don't worry, I am getting to the passenger experience. This is just a bit of kind of background. This is quite interesting that world air travel has grown statistically and historically about 5% per year. And as you can see, the various kind of recessions we've had, the 2 Gulf Wars, the oil shock, the SARS virus. I'm stood right in your way,
yeah, that's all right. I'll move around you.
The industry is very, very resilient. So it dips marginally, but when you look at it on a kind of macro scale, it just keeps ploughing on, about 5% per year. This graph is really startling. I was at a conference in Kuala Lumpur last week, and it was focused on the growth of air travel in Asia Pacific. So if you look at this area over here, so the dark blue is 2009, the light blue is 2030. So in 21 years, you can see absolutely colossal growth. So these numbers are horrible things called revenue passenger kilometres, which is how you measure air travel. So if you've got a plane with 100 seats and it travels 1,000 kilometres, you've got 10,000 RPKs. Do my maths right. Now what's really startling, if you compare the growth over in Asia Pacific to the rest of the world, I mean, yeah, the air travel, in the US is still very, very big, but the growth is colossal. And what's more startling is that in the US today, there are 3 seats available per year for every person in the US. Only 0.3 seats per head in Asia. If this 4.9 billion actually grows, so you have the same number of seats per head, you can see that this is it will be 7 times this value, 35 billion, RPK. So the aviation industry is really trending towards Asia Pacific and the other BRIC nations as well. So you can see where we are in the worldwide. So the growth is really enormous. So how are we meeting that growth? This is a slide clearly from Airbus. I mean, sorry, those other people, Boeing. No, I only say that as a joke. I'm really not. I'm completely in love with the aviation industry. I don't mind whose plane I fly on. I think, but the numbers are absolutely startling. And if you look at these numbers, the Airbus numbers are very, very similar. So they're saying here, up until from now till 2030, the need is for 33,500 new aircraft, which is a staggering number. So that's not just what Boeing's going to produce; that's what they believe the worldwide market to be. And again, you can see the light red segment is Asia Pacific. So you can see basically 1/3 of the demand for new aircraft is in Asia Pacific. Just to put this in perspective, Airbus and Boeing, just those 2 airframers that currently make about 1,100 aircraft a year. So it's a colossal amount, and they're ramping up very, very heavily. Both Airbus and Boeing, they're single-aisle aircraft, so the A320 for Airbus, 737 for Boeing. They're ramping up to over 40 aircraft per month. So they're churning these out. They're like shelling peas. It's absolutely very, very impressive. If you ever get the chance to go to an airframer, you get up into Seattle and see them produce 737s. It's really impressive to see. So they're basically producing, because they only work working days, 22 a month. They're basically churning out 2 a day. Wow. It's impressive. So now we're getting on to the bit that you've been waiting for. So passenger experience. Why do I call this talk the Passenger Experience Continuum? If you look back sort of 15, 20 years, flying on an aircraft as a passenger, it really was like a kind of patchwork quilt. So you'd walk onto the aircraft, and the seat didn't look like it belonged in there, and the sidewall was a different colour, and there was bits and pieces everywhere. And the service as well was all managed in different different places, different departments, different bits and pieces. There was no consistency in the service. There wasn't this kind of continuum. A lot of airlines now, what they're trying to do is give a consistent experience right through the journey. And we'll come on to what does the journey mean, but just to kind of put this in perspective, when I was at Airbus, we did some work with Singapore Airlines, and they identified 650 touch points on a passenger journey where you can either delight the passenger or disappoint him. That's a lot of opportunities to disappoint, or if you look more positively, you've got a lot of opportunities to delight. So that's what I mean by the passenger continuum. So what we're seeing now, and this was captured by this quote from Richard Stevens, as we move forward, air travel will be more about customers paying a premium for a collection of experiences. So a lot of the airlines now, you know, we've got the low-cost models. They're very well proven in the US, very well proven in Europe. You know, there are many people who aren't interested in what the experience is. They just want to get there cheaply. But that, in certain places is wearing thin. You know, there is a kind of bottom line where people don't want the service to dip down below. But there is a belief that premiums, so these kind of ancillary payments, will, if they help to give a better experience for the passenger's going to be happier. So, where does the passenger journey start? Now, of course, being in New York, I thought, okay, we'll take a picture of a New York cab. But in actual fact, if you look at the passenger journey, it really starts from the thought about whether you do travel or not, right through to you've done the, you know, you book the ticket, you've got to the airport, you know, you check in, right through to pick your bag up and you get to your final destination. So that's really what the passenger continuum is. So it's how do you make all of that better for the passenger? I think this is kind of the best bit of the airport, which is kind of when you first walk in. You know, the airports now, a lot of the modern airports, they're starting to become very welcoming. Some of the best passenger experience can be had at an airport, particularly, going back to Asia Pacific, if you go to Changi Airport in Singapore, it has museums, it has a 3-story slide for the kids, it has a butterfly house, it has gardens, it has a lake you can go and sit beside. It is absolutely incredible. If you want to compare that with some of the best airports in the world, you know, London Heathrow, I'm not going to pick on a US airport, you know, it is one hell of an experience at times getting through there. So again, brands need to ensure that this experience is personal, it's familiar, anticipatory and engaging, and a lot of the airlines are working very, very hard. They still have a long way to go, but they are kind of trying to get to grips with this. So one part of the passenger experience which has improved is the whole check-in process. So, you know, kind of 5, almost 10 years ago, we started to have these check-in kiosks, and it became a lot easier for the passengers to kind of serve themselves, check in, get their boarding pass, and then move forward to the aircraft. And now even this is being eclipsed because these systems are becoming quite legacy. And the IT infrastructure of an airport is actually very old in terms of its language, its architecture, etc. There's major issues in terms of trying to bring modern technology to interface with some of these old legacy systems. So even though airlines, airports are starting to use, you know, handheld devices, PED, smartphones, so that you can check in, some of the back-end systems, so that ticketing, reservations, etc. A lot of airlines looking very seriously at how they, you know, make this step forward. So this is kind of the good side of the airport experience, and then there's this bit. So probably the single worst experience that most travellers have today is security. You know, and there are steps being made now. The conference I was at last week, it's called Future Travel Experience, and it's looking at things like user biometrics, face recognition, things like the Trusted Traveller program, which the Department of Homeland Security has started. So it is, you know, there is progress being made. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but clearly it's an area where, you know, much more improvement needs to be brought to bear to improve the situation for the passenger. I once spoke to a British Airways crew member who said one of the hardest part of their jobs is being at the aircraft door, welcoming passengers on board, because they have to get the passenger over the airport experience before they can have the airline experience. So if you imagine, you're late to the airport, you get stuck in traffic, you try and rush through check-in, you try and rush through security, the security line is really long, but it's okay, you've got a new passport with a biometric chip in it. Oh, but the machine's broken down, so the biometric doesn't work, so you run to the gate. When you get on that plane, you're not in the best frames of mind, and that's what a lot of the airline staff are trying to focus on. Is like, how do we calm that passenger down, and that's how do we give them a better experience. So then there's that kind of calm. So you kind of break your neck getting through the airport, sorry, and then you finally get to kind of sit down, ring home, have a drink, and then wait to get on the plane. So talk quickly about the plane. Here's a plane. One of the things which is, I got into cabin design about 10 years ago, and one of the kind of struggles we have is that cabins are very much consumer influenced products. And the aircraft itself is an industrial good. So what I mean is typically the life cycle of the aircraft is about 30 years. It can be longer. You can extend the life of an aircraft, commercial aircraft, up to 40, 45 years. And 90% of the design of an aircraft is complete when you first put that aircraft into service. You do a bit on modifications, you do a bit on life extension. You look at some ongoing improvements as technology changes, but essentially the bulk of the aircraft is sorted when you deliver the aircraft. Conversely, what we've seen in aircraft cabins is it's very much a consumer good. It's very heavily influenced by what's going on the ground. Particularly things like industrial design now. If you look at the kind of trends which are going on in sort of, in home sort of kitchens, for example, industrial design, styling, the way technology is used, all of these things, the airlines pick up on and going, that'd be a nice thing to have in my cabin. So interestingly, the life cycle in an aircraft cabin is about 5 to 10 years. So an aircraft could get through 6 cabins in its lifetime. The drivers are constantly changing, and the challenges are that 90% of the changes happen after the aircraft has gone into service. So there's this huge kind of there's the kind of battle between the basic aircraft and customizing an aircraft with its interior. And a lot of the airlines of this world are constantly pushing the boundaries, and quite frankly introducing things onto aircraft which have no place to be on an aircraft. So Emirates, as you go up the stairs of the 380, at the top they have a fountain, a water fountain. Try and certify a fountain with the FAA and EASA. Why do you need a fountain on your aircraft there? The same plane also has 2 shower suites. Try and certify shower suites on an aircraft. Anyway, that's another story. So let's go on to the passenger. So the passenger is changing, and some of the figures and some of the things we're trying to cope with in aircraft design, cabin design, is the change in population. So there's a number of kind of trends which are really apparent. So the greying society. So what's interesting is that in Japan, Europe, and the US now, the 65-year plus segment of the population is now approaching 40%. So as a population, we're getting older, and we're also getting more affluent. So there's more elder travellers. So the people who have the money and the time to travel are the older set. Then we have the rise in giants. So the prevalence of obesity. I'm always uncomfortable with this slide. So some pretty staggering figures. By 2015, 2.3 billion adults will be obese. 700 million will be overweight. So I'm going to suck my stomach in now. But this is a really big issue, and it isn't just in the Western world. So yeah, no pun intended. Okay. Another very interesting statistic is there's now more female travellers than male. And another statistic I found very, very, very interesting is that I was at a conference in Miami just before Christmas, and even though it's about 50-something% female travellers, in 75% of all travel, it's a female who books the travel. So there's a whole new idea about how do you market travel, because travel used to be very much a male-dominated thing. You know, how do you make the macho male fly with your airline? And now it's a completely different mix. So now you have to market it to women, but without upsetting the men. And this was, after a day's conference, this was the gist. That you can't disenfranchise the man, but you have to market airline sales to women. So now I'm going to talk a bit about being on the aircraft. Now there are airlines out there who I think would like to see how many people you can actually squeeze on a plane. Okay, I was just about to say, has anyone flown Ryanair? So Ryanair is famous for saying a lot in the media, and some of the things are just, they just say it to kind of get PR. So one of the things they proposed was to eliminate lavatories. So on their 737s, take out the lavatories because you could squeeze in an extra 6 seats. And one economy class seat extra in a plane is worth $1 million over a 10-year period. So if you can add 6 seats per plane, and you've got 500 planes, it's a lot of money. And as I said earlier, the revenue is worth kind of 10 times the cost reduction. So it's extremely, extremely tempting to do.
What are they going to do, put a porta potty under each seat?
I think did anyone see the report about Gerard Depardieu, the French actor?
Yes.
He got caught short and the plane was on hold and he was rather drunk and he tried to use a bottle but missed. So I think, I think Ryanair, that's enough. So I think, Ryanair have tried a number of things. So they wanted to have a slot machine on the lavatory. That was the other thing. Pay £1 to get in. So don't be surprised if you see some of these things. But I mean, seriously, the real driver behind this is how do airlines, with their really slim margins, how do they increase their revenue?
And they also have like a standing room only 16.
Yeah, there's an Italian seat designer, supplier, Aviation, who came up with this idea of a kind of, it's like a bar stool saddle. So you kind of stand, squat on it, and then you can pull all the seats together, squeeze another few rows of seats in. It's not going to get, it won't ever get certified. You can't meet the exit limit on the aircraft. There's only so many seats you can physically get in and still show you can evacuate all the occupants of the aircraft in 90 seconds. So this is interesting, and again, this comes with that. I don't know, those of you may have seen the press announcements in the last couple of months from Southwest. They've just announced these new slimline seats, and it's a very interesting sell they've put to the market, and Lufthansa have done the same in Europe, and basically what they've done is they've made the seat thinner. If you make the seat thinner, and you also, some of the seats now have these bifold tables which are higher, so they've moved the hinge point, which means that they give you more room for your legs in front. So what they've actually done is reduce the pitch, so the distance between the seat rows, and that's allowed them to add extra rows of seats. So the cynics in the room, myself included, may suspect that this is just a ploy to get more passengers on the aircraft. But actually, I've not tried Southwest yet. They're not in operation with these seats. But I've flown Lufthansa, and they are actually as comfortable or as uncomfortable as the last seats that they had. So there is less distance between the seats, but the way they are designed, the body fits into them better, and you do actually have more legroom. Going back to BMI, so this kind of prevalence for body size, and it's doubling every 10 years. And I think a lot of focus is given to the Western world on this. But what's very interesting, and I hadn't appreciated this till recently, if you look at the BRIC countries, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, as their economy develops, so do their waistlines. So they're following exactly the same trends that the Western world is, and I found that quite surprising. Now, and the reason why this is an issue is that seat width is now almost as important as pitch. So actually, the distance between the armrests, because as you get bigger as a person, you don't just expand in this direction, you're going in this direction as well. And what's so interesting as an airframer is the moment you increase the width of the fuselage, so at Airbus, for example, on the A350, it's about 15 inches wider the fuselage than the old A330s, so you can fit 9 more comfortable seats, 18 inches wide, in an A350. Of course, what do the airlines do? Some of them, they turn around and say, okay, if you can get 9 18-inch seats in, you can get 10 narrow seats in. It's like, no, you're missing the point. The population is getting wider. And I just want to defend the airframers to say it's not Boeing, Airbus, Embraer, Bombardier who decide how many seats to fit in a plane. It's the airline. So you make the plane wider so it can have wider seats, they put more seats in. That's just the way of the world. So here we are, we're in a nice, crammed economy class cabin. Fairly typical kind of layout. But there's a lot going on in the business class side of things. So this is a fantastic cabin, A350. So business class is changing. There's been big changes in terms of passenger comfort on the aircraft. So if you look at these things at the bottom are the kind of the way the seats are developed. So you have these recliner cradles, the kind of lazy Zs. Still in operation on the KLM 747 fleet, probably the most uncomfortable way of getting across the Atlantic, in business class. Then you have these lie flat cocoons, so these are cocoon seats where you have a kind of shell which is behind your head. And the lie flat cocoon is a bit of a misnomer, because it is flat, but it's not horizontal. And you end up in a heap, yeah, you end up a heap in the bottom. Yeah. And if you're more than 5.5 feet tall, and you try and put the footrest up so you don't slide down, your head is off the back of it. Yeah, these look good. Then you have the full flat cocoon, and then the innovative full flat. And what's been happening is, so the real driver for this has been density. So it's a bit like cutting pastry. You know, how many rounds of pastry can you get out of a flat piece? So what we're trying to do here is increase the density. How many seats can you cram in that real estate? And the problem is that these recliners were nice and light, but the weight is going up and up and up. So you're kind of cramming more seats in, but the weight's going up. Da, da, da. So there's constant drive to try and balance the use of the real estate. So we've had all sorts of innovative full flat configurations. So the sort of staggered front facing, yin yang, toe to toe, herringbone aisle facing, herringbone window facing, front facing angle bed. None of these are just about making the cabin look aesthetically better. It's all about how can you stack more people in the cabin. So some of these you may have flown. So the yin yang, for example, is the old British Airways layout, which is quite funky because you can fly backwards, and the first time you do it, it's quite interesting. You know, but there's all sorts of variations, but it's all about squeezing more people in. And this is another thing about the passenger changing. So you know, people's shape is changing, not just body mass index, but height. So one of the challenges you always face in a cabin is that you try and design the overhead bins, the way you put your luggage, so that this 95% man can stand underneath without ducking. But then the 5% female can't reach the bin to put a bag in. And if you've ever flown Singapore Airlines, you'll see this, because none of the flight crew, cabin crew, can reach the bins. So it prompts all of the male passengers to help the flight attendants, and they all put the bags up there. So this is one of the battles you always face. And if you go from a 9-abreast cabin, sorry, I'm pointing at the screen, I should be pointing at here, a 9-abreast cabin to an 8-abreast cabin, the problem's even worse because this chair sticks out, so the lady's even further away. The other problem is if you make this lower so she can reach, it's now too dark in the cabin and you don't have that kind of airy spaciousness. So a lot of cabin design and passenger experience from being inside the cabin is really trying to get a compromise that work, you know, the best you can get for all. Stowage compartment size is a huge problem now. So we said that airlines want to drive ancillary revenue because that's how they can impact their profitability. So they have these great systems now for charging you for checking. So what do? Bring it on the aircraft.
Right.
So now, no matter what it says, you can bring on the aircraft. Half the passengers bring twice as much as it says you can bring. They've got overhead bins which don't physically fit in the lockers, or they just, I'm absolutely amazed how many delays are caused by, the crew basically, they stuff the bins full, then there's 10 bags over, and then the bags go in the hold, but the passenger didn't pay, so that's fine. But the plane's half an hour late. There's got to be a better way. So this is becoming a very important design consideration. If you look at the new 737 interior, the bin again is larger, so that because it's reflecting that passengers are bringing more onto the aircraft. Windows is an interesting thing. So a lot of work is done to look at how passengers at different height, where they're sat, the view they have from the window. Very interesting, and I don't know why, two different schools of thought. So on Airbus, the windows are lower so the passenger can look down, and so basically if you're on the ground you see more of the tarmac, and when you're in the air you're looking more towards the ground. Boeing windows are higher, so you tend to look, you get perspective, but you can't sort of look towards the ground. Don't ask me why, but historically they have a different approach. But windows are getting bigger. They get more light into the cabin. We're going to have to hurry up. So, we're going to come on a bit more onto light. So, designers now have a much better understanding of how light is used. And if you've flown recently, a lot of the aircraft now are using LED technology, 3 or 4 colour LEDs. They're either LEDs plus a fluorescent strip, or they're just LEDs. And what it allows you to do is provide a whole range. Oh, this is changing. Okay, a whole range of different colour scenarios, and these are being used to great effect. There's been work done that you can actually get food to taste different based on the light that you shine on it, which I find which is quite interesting. The other thing is you already have the problem that at altitude, food and beverage taste different. So, for example, the wine sommeliers at an airline will taste the wine in an altitude chamber, because your palate changes. If you like meat, so steak, in a green light, you see how many passengers eat it. If you put it in a red light, it looks better. So it's quite interesting, and what you're seeing is now airlines are using lighting effects to kind of help the passenger experience, and to try and, again, calm them down. There's different lights, you have different lighting scenarios. You can have a kind of boarding light, then you have the sort of the lighting that you have in flight. This is, I think, this is an Emirates aircraft, and it has a starlight ceiling. I don't know if you can see these little dots up here. These are individually drilled holes, which each have a fibre optic. They are drilled, they are hand drilled. I met the guy who did this. They're hand drilled because this is actually the star constellation above Dubai. No joking. They actually have an astronomer. The airline brings an astronomer and says, right, that one's in the wrong place. You should go over there. And anyway, there's got to be a better way of using technology to program this somehow, but at the moment it's done with 3,000 individually drilled holes, but you get the idea. So lighting effects are being used to great effect. This is Virgin America, I think. They're really into their purple and orange. I mean, I'm not sure quite what emotion this evokes. Apart from it's funky. It's like, okay, put the lights on the funky setting. Food and beverage is a huge subject. I've only got one slide because Gloria was very mean and only gave me 1 hour. So, but food and beverage is an enormous subject, and some of the topics which are going on at the moment in the industry is the full service carriers. So people like British Airways or Air France, KLM, Lufthansa, they won't charge for food. Which means, because they're not making much money, the food is dreadful. And you've got other airlines who have a much more, I would say, a better view on things. They're starting to charge for food, and the quality of food is starting to improve. And there's a lot of airlines now who are playing around with this idea that you can buy your food, or when you buy your ticket, you choose your food in advance, so then they only have to load the food they know they can sell on the plane. They're not just carrying stuff which just goes into landfill. So there's huge movement going on in food and beverage, and there's this real competition now between the airlines and the airports. So, I flew Continental from, XCOM United. I flew United from Newark to Las Vegas in January, and I was amazed how many people brought food onto the plane. I mean, the food smelled like a fast food shop. You know, all you could smell is pizza, you know, burgers and chicken wings. It was like, ugh. You know, why not sell better food on board? So there's a lot going on in food and beverage, but it's a really influential topic in terms of improving the customer experience. Right, let's go on to some IFE. So this is one of the airlines that claims to be the first airline that had in-flight entertainment on the aircraft. So it's 1924, Imperial Airways, and you can see them trying to load on a reel of film. So IFE has been about for quite some time now. And there's a huge explosion of content now available. On the Emirates A380, for example, they have 1 terabyte of storage just for IFE. There's more computing power driving the IFE than there is driving the plane. No joke, really. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal. And IFE is the second most expensive part of an aircraft after the engines. So it's a big deal. And what we're seeing now is that whole industry of content management, the big thing on the aircraft used to be early window content, which is pre-DVD release. So the movie studios will release at the cinemas, it will go to the aircraft next, before it goes to DVD, then it goes to DVD. So it's an extremely, data security is a big issue, because if the films leak before they go out on DVD, the studio stands to lose an awful lot of money. But content is changing, and the window is now reducing. So those people who may be familiar with the content world, there's now only about 6 to 8 weeks where you watch a film on an aircraft before it comes out on DVD, and that's shrinking all the time. And all the other methods of absorbing content is really bringing pressure onto that, you know, to a greater degree. These things are really impacting now the airlines. Portable media players, or PEDs, choose your acronym. So things like the iPad, Zoom. iPad, for example, Jetstar, which is the low-cost arm of Qantas in Australia, their CEO went out and bought 6,000 iPads and then told his IFE guys, right, I want this as my IFE. And they've worked really hard for 2.5 years to work with the studios, because the big thing the studios aren't happy about is, why should I put my expensive, should be protected content onto a passenger device that they can then walk off the plane, or they can screen grab, or whatever it may be. But there's huge moves here. United had a test of about, I think, 500 Zoom players. You've got people with Sony PSPs that they're using for movies. I'm not sure I want to watch a movie on a Sony PSP, but tablet computers are really big. And the next big thing which is coming in is wireless streaming of content onto the aircraft. So with this kind of emergence of 2-screen entertainment, which my teenage daughter loves to do, watch the TVs, doing something else on the laptop, you see a lot of airlines which are following the same route. So they've embedded IFE on the seat back, and they're streaming media to another device. Very quickly, again, this is a whole nother lecture, but theatrical workflow. One of the things that there's a lot of work being done, and Gloria suggested I kept this in, was that typically the movies that you see on an aircraft, on an airline, are kind of hand-built for that airline. So about 3 minutes into any movie on an airline, you'll see all of a sudden there's a watermark which says the airline's name for about 10 seconds, and it's just to protect, so that if that gets pirated, they know who to go and prosecute. But basically, the movies are cut at the moment, so they're cut for individual languages, they're subtitled, they have closed captions. Depending on the airline, they might have a certain religious view, so certain scenes will be taken out of the movie. It's a very, very convoluted supply chain, and a lot of people looking at the moment about how they can improve that, so they have one kind of master file which can dynamically create multiple versions of the same movie for all these different outlets. But When I'm invited back, we'll talk about that. So internet is a big thing. So in the internet today, particularly in the US, I mean worldwide there's about 1,500 aircraft installed with Wi-Fi at the moment. About 1,400 of those in the US. So the sort of prevalent system in the US is an air-to-ground 3G network, GoGo. Anyone use GoGo on the plane?
Yeah.
Okay, pretty familiar. So basically it's Wi-Fi. If there's only a couple of you on the plane working, it works really well. If they get more than 5% passengers, it starts to struggle. And I think one of the things that the airlines and the service providers are struggling with is the fact that no matter how fast you can make the internet on an aircraft, it will always be 10 times faster on the ground. So the passenger expectation is something that you have to manage very, very carefully. But there's a lot of work being done. One of the difficulties is that people on the ground typically expect the internet to be free more and more. So why should you pay for it on the plane? So there's the expectation that it should be free. And there's a lot of very clever third-party work being done now to have a third party pay for the internet connection. Maybe it's a walled garden. This is a huge area of development at the moment. How can the airlines monetize or fund their internet connection? So it's quite interesting because I'm an engineer by trade, deal a lot in technology. You sometimes, if you're in a room of like-minded people, you forget the fact that the occupants of an airline cabin can range from 9 months to 90 years old, and in IT proficiency from complete familiarity to utter ignorance. You assume that everybody has 3 gadgets, knows how to connect them to the internet, is streaming content, loaded the stuff they want to watch before they got on the plane, etc., etc. And it's a big struggle at the moment to try and get all of this technology working, and also to balance these very much legacy systems with what's going on in consumer goods, make it work. I know, thank you. So we talked about computers, use of laptops, etc. Something which is quite interesting is the whole use of mobile phones. There's an act in the US called the Hang Up Act, where basically cell phones are still completely banned from use on the aircraft. In the rest of the world, they're not. And it isn't so much about the voice, but I think there's huge opportunities which are lost because of not being able to use GPRS. There's a lot of commercial benefits from having that you can address an individual passenger because you have his mobile phone number. You can send him personalised information, you can send personal advertising, etc., etc. But I think we'll see that change, and there's an FAA Act which is going through at the moment to try and debate this to see whether the use can be opened up. But there are other approaches. It's interesting that in terms of voice calls on an aircraft, there's almost no complaints in the rest of the world. But the common misconception is that you'll hear somebody shouting at their phone like you do on the train or on a bus. But in actual fact, the aircraft environment is quite noisy. There's a lot of atmospheric noise going on. And in fact, unless someone is absolutely shouting into their phone, you don't hear them. But I digress and move on. But one of the...
Does it interfere with the cockpit? That's what they tell us here.
No. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the prompt. So, on modern aircraft, there is no interference between electronic devices and the aircraft instruments. There's been 1 or 2 very isolated cases where there's been a specific issue, but no incident has ever happened because of this. The main reason they tell you not to use an electronic device on an aircraft during taxi, takeoff and landing is because you should be listening to the safety announcement and not to want to put a dull note on the evening, but the most dangerous part of a flight is takeoff and landing. And the rest of the time, the thing stays up in the air and you watch movies for 13 hours. So they should actually tell you to put your book and your magazine down and pay full attention to the safety, but it's easier to blame and say that one of the things about consistency is you've got the airlines telling you to book your ticket on a mobile phone. Go to the gate with a mobile phone. You get on the plane and say, turn that thing off. When actually what you need to do is find ways of re-educating so you keep that phone on so the airline can continue to address that passenger throughout his entire journey. Because at the moment you're only using it for the first bit of the journey, not throughout the journey. So one of the challenges that we're seeing is that the connected aircraft means that, with the emergence of kind of Twitter, Facebook, you've got passengers complaining real time in flight, which is becoming a huge problem. About 70% of the traffic, the social media traffic about airlines, is complaints. And airlines are handling it in different ways. A very positive example that we had in Europe was how Lufthansa, SAS and some other airlines handled the ash cloud crisis. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but basically European airspace was shut down for about a week and a half with the first incident. And it was complete chaos. There were people trapped all over the world. Some were very lucky and were on some remote island and got to stay there with the airline paying their hotel bill. Other people were stuck in airports and couldn't go anywhere. So how an airline handles those kind of incidents with social media connectivity is very important. A quick plug for Delta. Delta Assist in the US are quite phenomenal. They have a team of 12 people and they address every single Facebook and tweet that they receive very, very quickly. They have very tight KPIs in terms of how they turn it around. But it's becoming a real issue. So there's now more airlines who have social media accounts than there are those that have frequent flyer programs, because it's something that they can't ignore anymore. So that's just been the Twitter. So airline retail, this is another area where the airlines are increasingly trying to look at how they can use technology innovation to drive more revenue out of the passenger. So they want that credit card. So one of the things that having a connected aircraft brings is real-time credit card validation. So at the moment, there is a considerable amount of shrinkage, which is the airline word for people stealing stuff basically by using fake credit cards. Because they swipe your credit card, but it's not authenticated until you get on the ground. So real-time credit card validation is a real boon there. Finally, you land. And probably, getting off the aircraft and through immigration is less painful than getting onto the aircraft through security. But again, things like biometric passports, fingerprint recognition, facial recognition, there's some systems which are being trialled now in certain airports where you don't even have to stop to go through immigration. So they see you're a trusted traveller, you had the interview beforehand, you don't have to hold your passport out. Basically, as you're walking, there's a zone where they'll scan your face, do the comparison, say yes, that's that right person, you get a green light and carry on walking. So, a lot of the airports really focusing very heavily on this because clearly their infrastructure only has a certain capacity. You saw the growth in air travel. They're not suddenly going to be able to build 5 times as many airports. They've got to get more self-loading cargo through the airport. So, okay, you're in luggage claim and baggage. Interesting thing I didn't say at the start about baggage. One of the things which Qantas actually kind of kicked off is that Qantas use a tag now for their frequent flyers, which is a permanent tag, which is RFID technology in it. So for the frequent traveller, you keep this tag on your luggage, and it's updated from your smartphone when you buy a ticket or when you check in. So you never have to get this re-tagged. So there are a lot of systems now which the airlines are trialling where you basically pick up your ticket or you've got it on your smartphone already and you drop your bag off, and you don't actually have to speak to an airline employee. So lots of things going on, and you'll be happy to know that's my last slide. So thank you very much for your attention.